Okay, and welcome to No One Asked for Your Opinion, the podcast where I kind of just ramble about things related to pop culture, cinema, books, television, all that other fun stuff. Just pretty much putting my opinion out there. It's a very unstructured format. I just kind of have topics that I have, and I just kind of like talk about those topics. And yeah, it's a pretty chill podcast. Not too much of glitz or glam or jokes or anything. It's just kind of just me, just talking into a mic and sharing my opinion on stuff that I felt maybe did not warrant necessarily a video essay, but I still kind of just want to talk about those topics. So for episode 3, there's 3 topics I kind of like want to talk about. First is these are all related to The Rise of Skywalker, which I do apologize. It's been 2.5 to 3 weeks since the movie already dropped in theaters, but I just kind of feel like that it's been such a contentious, divisive movie that even 3 weeks later, there's just so much to talk about, especially considering that the co-writer for the script, Chris Terrio, keeps just dropping these atomic bombs out there, and in regards to like the narrative process and how all that just all came to be, that it's just, no matter where I go on social media, there's just something new out there. And so this is kind of like hopefully going to be the last podcast that is going to be primarily focused on The Rise of Skywalker. So warning, spoilers if you haven't seen it yet, which if you're listening to this, I don't know why you haven't seen it yet, but if you haven't seen it, spoilers from here on out. All right, so first topic I'm going to talk about is the female gaze and the importance of that in Star Wars. So there's this thing, and especially in feminism studies, that you kind of learn about, even if you're not taking women's studies in university, if you're studying literature or if you're studying creative writing, English, film, cinema, the topic of the male gaze and the female gaze always will come up in some lecture or in some class, because how characters are written and how they are presented is either in these 2 gazes, the female gaze and the male gaze. So with the Star Wars saga, the first 2 trilogies are pretty much primarily written from a male gaze. It's from the gaze of the males, from the male perspective. So a lot of the female characters don't have much agency, or they are merely props for the male characters to achieve their goals or whatever the case may be, or they just serve more as a love interest than a role of pivotal importance. Whereas with the female gaze, this is just sort of reversed. So when we talk about the female gaze, we're talking about how the woman, the female, takes the assertive role. She's now the pivotal character. Things are told from her perspective. The view of her narrative, the view of her world is from her perspective. The way that characters are presented on screen is presented more in a way that would be more, resonates more with the female than with the male audience. So for episodes 1 through 6, we had pretty much a primarily male gaze, most notably in the Return of the Jedi, with the first act, which is going to Jabba's palace, and technically it's like a floating palace, but whatever. Was it a floating palace, or was it I have no idea. Anyway, going to Jabba's palace and freeing Han. That whole scene is from a male gaze. Leia is in the slave outfit. She is there to be gazed at, and even though that she kind of takes out, she does, she takes out Jabba the Hutt and saves Han. The fact of the matter that whole scene was written that way, she was presented that way, is in the male gaze. Now, flip side, in the sequel trilogy, the new episodes 8 through 9, the story is told from a female perspective, the female gaze. So if people wonder why there's so many females that prefer the sequel trilogy, or why there's so many fans of a villainous character like Kylo Ren or Hux or any of these other male characters, it's because the way that they're presented and the way that their stories are written in a way that females can sympathize and identify with. Whereas some of these topics may actually be not, I don't want to say offensive, but may not be attractive to a male audience. Kylo Ren has characteristics that a female could sympathize with, but a male might consider to be weak. He's such as his petulance, his outbursts, his anger, his attitude. Some of these things, his emotional struggles, some of that may consider that to be more weak. But for the female, it's actually something that's in theory, it's sympathetic. It's something that we want to see a male, that struggle in the male. And as through the character of Rey, we are able to travel and see this from her eyes, from her perspective. So why this is all important kind of like boils back to, not to say boils back, but like it kind of goes into what the inclusion of Star Wars, of telling the hero's journey, but not telling it in such a way that is exclusionary. And it's very inclusive. It broadens the doors. It opens up the possibilities. And it also gives agency to the female characters. Rey has agency in the first two movies. Leia has agency in these movies. The Holdo has agency. Rose had agency in episode 7. Episode 8. These characters are in control of themselves. These characters are relatable. These characters are written in a way that is powerful and inclusive enough for women to identify with. They are not just merely props. They are not just love interests. They are more than that. They serve a purpose to the story, to the narrative, and they help these other characters, achieve their goals, or these characters help them achieve their goals. But for some reason in The Rise of Skywalker, this just kind of like falls to like the wayside. Like the story has been twisted from the female gaze back to the male gaze, and in a way that it just seems as if the agency of these female characters, the characteristics of the male characters, everything is just written in such a way that it almost seems like that the movie was written to exclude females. Well, and I don't want to be like, no, they purposely were like, oh, hey, we just don't want no girls in our clubhouse. No, it's not like that. It's more of Rey is not written in a way that a woman could sit there, or a female could sit there and be like, this is someone that I identify with. This is someone that I feel has agency. This is someone that is leading, that is becoming of herself, that she's in control of herself, that she is, making her own destiny. Writing the final chapter with the male gaze kind of robs Rey of that agency. She is not defined by who she is. She is defined by what she is, and that is her powers and everything stem from a patrilineal line of she's a Palpatine. She didn't get these powers because the Force chose her. She got these powers because she is the granddaughter of the galaxy's most worst, terrible human ever. And of course, this isn't saying that they intentionally wrote it this way. This is just a problem of basically lack of diversity in the writer's room. people not name checking or checking the materials before they get filmed, because a lot of the things that Chris Terrio has been talking about in his interviews is that he and JJ, though JJ hasn't said anything in regard to the scripts, he's been very quiet for some reason, is that the ending that Rey got in episode 8 was not good enough, that she needed to be from somebody. She needed to be related to somebody within the saga that was powerful, that she could not be powerful on her own, that she had to be related to somebody, because her story felt incomplete if she wasn't, which is again a view from the male gaze. Now, if from a view from the female gaze, she would not have to be related to a Palpatine. She is fine just on her own, making her own character, having her own agency. So by saying that she had to be related to Palpatine as a way to develop conflict within her, her conflict did not have to be related to blood lineage or ancestry lineage, because her story was about belonging. And even though she finds out that her parents are drunks or whatever in the Jakku desert, she comes out of that reborn. It's in the hero's journey. She's now leaving the second stage of the journey and heading on into the final and third stage. She has grown. She has matured. That's why she has her hair is down. She has this whole womanly look and appeal to her, versus Kylo Ren, who, even though he sheds his mask, he's still, dejected. He's gained all this, but for at what cost? So by saying that that's not good enough for her, that's not good drama, it just makes me wonder, like, did they ever take into consideration her story? Did they ever consult with the story group in regards to the importance of the female gaze and how this relates to this new saga? Or were they just basically saying, robbing her of her character and basically making her like a two-dimensional, flat, static character that neither grows nor suffers any conflict that falls in line with her story thus far? Throwing such a curveball just does more injustice to her than does justice for her, I guess, in a way. Because at the end of the day, she didn't need to be a Palpatine to take the Skywalker name. She could have just been Rey and then just decided, you know what, I want to take the Skywalker name because I feel as if the belonging I sought for was actually through this family. That she didn't need to be this whole, well, she's dark because of Palpatine. That was a struggle that she had of her own. That was something that she struggled with, and she did not need to have that be tied into some genetic mishap and that she won the genetic lottery and got the worst guy in the galaxy. That, by robbing Rey of her agency, it just switched the final movie back to, this original male gaze of, it doesn't matter what the character, who the character is, it's all about what that character is. Anyway, and that's kind of like when I get that, so that's the end of that rant, 14-minute rant, but yeah. So now this is kind of like going back now into redemption, and this is the second topic I'm going to talk about, and this one here, oh boy. Chris Terrio does not have a good answer for this, and well, he didn't have a good answer for the Rey Palpatine, but this one here, because he doesn't have an answer. He's just, there's been no answer for this. And the idea that he had to, redemption through death is the best way to wrap up this guy's story. It just seems very intuitive to, the East Asian mythos that, Star Wars has been built on. Now, if we could remember that Star Wars, of course, has been influenced by Flash Gordon and 1940s serials, action-adventure serials, but it's also been rooted a lot in Japanese cinema, especially the Akira Kurosawa films like The Seven Samurai, Rashomon, those titles. And so the story of redemption, the story of these characters, their rise and falls, Chris Terrio likes to call it a lot like a Greek tragedy in a way, but I feel as if Star Wars is less of a Greek tragedy and more of a Japanese or a Japanese God. I keep thinking Enka, but Enka is music. But you get what I'm saying. Kabuki, there we go, Kabuki theater, in that sense of the traditional Japanese drama. And usually in this theme and topic, when it comes to redeeming yourself, redemption, and a lot of Japanese media, a lot of it points to repenting for one's evil deeds. One example I could bring up that is probably most closely related to that of Ben Solo Kylo Ren's story is the anime and manga called Rurouni Kenshin, which is about a guy who fought in a war, and he fought on the side of the emperor, and he was an assassin, and he was brutal on the battlefield. He killed hundreds and hundreds of men. It could have been also women and children too. He just was out there. He just slaughtered people. He was known as the Batosai, which he was just brutal. And he had this dark, evil past. He was bred to be a killer from childhood. That's what he did until he fell in love. Once he fell in love, he realized that there was more to life than killing. But when he lost that love, he swore his life to repenting for his sins. And so he changed his blade to a reverse blade so that the sharp point never is facing his opponent. It always faces him. And so when he does strike at an opponent, it's a strike not to kill, but only to incapacitate. And so throughout this series, it's a long series, several episodes. I think there's probably a few movies out there. In the manga, it's about how this young man who spent most of his teenage years and young adulthood killing people meets these individuals, has to face his past, but then through facing his past is able to achieve redemption. And so I feel as if, in the Rise of Skywalker, the way that they handled Ben Solo's redemption, I felt was unfulfilling, quickly handled, and kind of missed the point of having the emotional impact of his redemption, because redeeming him wasn't just the act of him killing his father. His father's death caused the turmoil with him, but he's done so much more than just killing his father that he needed to have to, repent for what he has done. And so Chris Terrio's liking it to a scene in Batman versus Superman where I think, God, that movie was so bad I wiped it from my memory. But a scene where Superman talks to his father, I believe it is, or is it Batman talks to his father? One of those. I don't know what this guy's obsession is with parents, but anyway. And so he was like, well, by Kylo talking to his father and repeating the scenes from episode 7, he is able, at that moment, he has redeemed himself and he goes to save Rey, and then he makes the ultimate sacrifice, and boom. So, but I feel like that's just cheapening, because no one in that narrative, no one in that story knows what he did. There's no closure to that story. The only one that knows what Ben Solo did was Rey and Leia and Luke, if we assume that they were Force ghosts and they watched this, especially since Leia apparently waited until Ben died and went to the Force and whatever. But no one else knows. And there was never a scene that showcased Rey telling anybody that I won the day because Ben Solo saved my life. None of that. He just dies. And so because of that, it's like that redemption has been robbed. Because he doesn't apologize to Poe. He doesn't apologize to Finn. He doesn't spend the rest of his life in the galaxy righting his wrongs. Even if he had to be arrested and trialed, the whole idea of redemption for Ben wasn't merely, going in there, making up in his mind, apologizing to his memory father and then running to defeat Palpatine and then giving his life up for Rey. I feel like that it's just cheap. It doesn't serve no purpose, and it doesn't meet the theme and mythos of Star Wars, which is, repenting for, the crimes that one has done. Now, of course, people could say like they're drawing a lot of parallels because of Darth Vader and how in the original trilogy, there's only 30 minutes of Darth Vader, and in those 30 minutes, we just know him as a bad guy until he finally, sacrifices his life for his son. And the reason why the original trilogy could get away with that is because we don't know nothing about Anakin Skywalker. We know what Obi-Wan told Luke in that 5 minutes, and then from there we don't know nothing else, right? So we could get rid of a character that's only had 30 minutes of screen time. There is no emotional connection to this character. We just know that he's a villain that did the good thing and he died. That's it. And then of course you have the prequels, which build on that, but those prequels came out 20 years after the original. So now with the sequel trilogy, we have a new trilogy where it looks like that the sins of the past have caught up and they're repeating the same steps over and over and over and over again. And so you would think that, they would break this terrible cycle, right? And simply just, let this guy, become kill Kylo Ren, become Ben Solo, and, atone for his sins, restore the balance. But whatever, he had to die. So, which I guess, but that just cheapens the heroic sacrifice. I believe that too as well. His heroic sacrifice is so he saved her life, and so, but no one knows about it. We don't know if she's ever told anybody about it. There's no nod to his death. So yeah, and wow. And then lastly, Chris Terrio. Oh God. So he's been doing a lot of interviews. He did one with The Hollywood Reporter. He's done one with GQ, and he's done one with another online magazine. And all of them just seem like a Mexican shootout, like a Mexican standstill, which is essentially where everybody's pointing guns at each other's heads, and you don't know if one person shoots another person. They're basically at a stalemate, and everybody's pointing fingers. And I feel as if like this. I feel like that he doesn't understand the mythos of Star Wars, and I feel that he was writing a script that felt more like a paper that was written 8 hours before it was due than a movie that felt organic and true to the lore that was established over the last 8 films. He states that the original sin was the separation of the twins at the end of episode 3, and that the whole Skywalker saga was about reuniting the twins on Tatooine, where everything began, which doesn't make any sense because that totally ignores the entire prequels. You know, there's a reason why it's called Episode 1, because the whole saga started because of Anakin. In the original trilogy, in A New Hope, they bring up that your father was Anakin. He was a great Jedi who died and blah blah blah, and now you're going to take his legacy. Like, it all started with Anakin. So to say that the original sin was the separation of twins, no, the original sin was Anakin falling to the dark side. The original sin was Anakin's passion and love and selfishness and fear and anger of losing the woman that he loved. That was the original sin. His actions led to the separation of twins. And it really, to say that like the twins always wanted to be together just totally ignores Han. It's like it almost comes off incestuous in a way, because like at the end of the movie, it's like, well, they say Luke and Leia informally adopt Rey as their child, which goes back to like, then, you know, where's Ben Solo? You know, like all this talk for 2 movies straight of we got to bring Ben home, bring him home, bring him back. And then it was just like this guy gets yeeted, he dies, and then like no one cares. But oh, hey, Han and Leia, we need to bring them back together and end the saga on that note, because they should have been together from the beginning. It's just really bizarre. It's just so bizarre. And that's just not even focusing on the fact that the guy doesn't even realize that that's not Luke's saber, that's Anakin's saber. Luke made a saber and it's somewhere on Ahch-To. Like, bruh. I mean, Luke didn't even have that saber long enough for it to even be his. I think he had a year? It was a year between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, and then he loses it, and then another year skip and he has his own lightsaber. So burying it in the sand, and not only that, ending it in Tatooine, saying that Tatooine is where it all began, when the story began in Naboo. Palpatine's from Naboo, Padme's from Naboo. Anakin is sent to Naboo. He meets Padme on Naboo. Everything happens on Naboo. Everything terrible that has happened in Luke and Anakin's life happened on Tatooine. Everything terrible that has happened to Han and Leia has happened on Tatooine. Tatooine is nothing but bad memories and bad stuff and bad things happening. And to say that Leia and Luke, by giving homage to end the saga, to return them home, that was never their home. They wanted to leave the freaking planet so bad, you know, that Luke was about to join the Imperial Navy. Like, oh Lord. So anyway, just the more I read the interviews, the more I'm just like, this guy just doesn't. Whoever. I feel like that this movie was made for people who are like, that's not my Star Wars. That audience. Like, those last 2 films are not my Star Wars, but this film here, that's my Star Wars. I think it felt like it was made for the people that hated the prequels, hated the sequels, but were like diehard OT fans, and they were just like, yes, it all began and ends on Tatooine. Maybe for you, but there are people that are prequel fans that felt shafted by that ending. There are people that are sequel fans that felt shafted by that ending. Yes, the OT is important, but George Lucas wrote 3 other books to explain whatever the hell happened for the OT. There are 3 books, and to ignore those 3 books to favor the other 3 books is, I don't understand. I don't get it. So I think this is it. I think I finally got it off my chest. I think I finally got all of the Rise of Skywalker drama off my chest. I think I could breathe now, except on Twitter. I'm still going to be tweeting about it because someone's going to post something and I'm going to see it and I'm going to have to tweet about it. But in good news, Adam Driver's Some good news. Adam Driver's charity, I think it's called Arts in the Armed Forces, has raised double their annual budget in a matter of 2 weeks because of fans of the sequel trilogy, fans of Ben Solo. And that's a really good thing. And I really like to see fandom coming together and supporting, causes like that, especially a cause like Arts in the Armed Forces, which, it gives, presents and shares art with a profession that, doesn't get to experience that much often. And art is a form of therapy, and considering the stress and the sometimes pain and suffering that a lot of our military, enlisted military go through, having something like this where actors come and perform for them and give them an intimate, experience of experiencing theater, not just like a USO show, but like actual theater for not only the officers but their friends and family is a really good nonprofit effort. And I'm glad that fandom has the Star Wars fans have came together and contributed a crap ton of money to keep this nonprofit afloat, because it's very hard for nonprofits to get money and fundraise, and having fans come together like this is really good. And it also shows that there's not only a toxic side but a very wonderful, a bright side to fandom. And despite all the hell that these movies have put the cast and crew through, it's good to know that there's always some gleaming hope out there that brings a little light and positivity, especially in this world today. And even though I do complain about Chris Terrio a lot for these last 2 weeks, it's nothing personal. It's just more of writer to writer, just trying to make sense of it all. But yeah, that's it for this podcast. Again, 30 minutes, probably gonna have to cut this down, but if you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. I am still working on that Luke video. I'm still, because I'm like I have to edit this video since the Rise of Skywalker, so I was like, do I end it on how his story was told on The Last Jedi, or do I continue it for that little corny bit that he was in The Rise of Skywalker? So it's just a lot of that, and finding footage, and just the time to edit the videos is another time. So I will get that out hopefully, because I know someone asked for that video like 8 months ago, and I've been working on it, and I promised to get it out, and I've been just stonewalling it, so I do apologize. But that is definitely the next video essay. So that's all. Thank you for listening, and I'll catch you guys maybe next week or the week after. Bye bye.